Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Welcome everyone, and we are so sorry for the last minute change to be a 100% live streaming event, so we really appreciate your understanding, and again, apologize for the inconvenience, but nonetheless, we are so happy you are joining us via the live stream. We host this Government Analytics Breakfast Forum along with REI Systems. We meet about once every other month, and the purpose is to create a community of people in academia and industry who are interested in talking about how analytics are being used in the public sector to solve various challenges. Our speaker will present today our two speakers will present today for approximately 30 minutes or so, and then we will take questions at the end. And we very much encourage you to post your questions in the chat box. Our panelists will be delighted to answer them. We very much want to have a discussion, so please submit questions so that we can have a conversation about the presentation today. We also encourage you to tweet about the event using the hashtag GabForum. And note that a recording of the event will be posted online about 48 hours afterwards, so you're welcome to review what was said or share the recording with your colleagues. We, again, thank you for taking some time out of your day to participate, and I will now turn the program over to my colleague at REI Systems, Jeff Myers, to introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Jen, and thank all of you for joining us. Unfortunately, not in person, so you don't have a chance to get to meet each other. If you haven't been to one of these events, I think that's actually one of the best pieces, which is people get to kind of talk with each other about common problems they face and get ideas from each other about how to solve them, as well as share the successes they've had. It's a good networking opportunity, and we can certainly share around the list of folks who have attended for this event with you, and if you are interested in trying to reach out to each other, we can certainly help facilitate that as well. I also want to put in a quick plug. Hopefully, in person, if things have calmed down, on May 5th, we'll have our next iteration of this event. We'll have Trey Bradley, who works with the General Services Administration in support of the Chief Data Officers Council, and a Johns Hopkins Government Analytics Program student, Jed Herman, who also works at Results for America, helping think through potential performance metrics that may work across a variety of different government agencies and levels. And they'll be discussing the use of data and evidence for performance management and for chief data officers, kind of challenges both in gathering the data as well as using it. So we'll look forward to that on May 5th, and again, hopefully we'll be back together in person at that point. Just a brief bit about REI. REI works with a number of federal agencies. One of the ones that we're focused on right now is the Health Resources and Services Administration, which funds public health clinics throughout the country. We're bringing artificial intelligence, grants management, a variety of different analytic tools, not only to HRSA, but also to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as well as to NASA and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services with some of our most recent activities. We look forward and hope to sponsoring many more of these events because we think that the use of data and evidence is one of the most important things that can help government improve its performance and capabilities and focus in the areas that are most important to the American people, the customer of the government. I do want to mention, though, that we're going to have an hour today. We're going to have a half-hour presentation by our two kind panelists. And the panelists include Diana Epstein, who is the Senior Evidence Team Lead for the Office of Management Budget. She clearly has a cross-government perspective, but she's also got a perspective from former work outside of government. She's worked at Abt Associates, as well as, I apologize, within government for the Corporation for National and Community Service. She's had roles in a variety of sectors and now kind of has a cross-government perspective, which I think will be quite valuable to you. She holds a Master in Public Policy from the University of California, Berkeley, go Bears, as well as a PhD from the RAND Corporation. She's joined by a person from a particular agency to help give us some real concrete context to some of the conversation today, and that is Christina Yancey. She has works leading the program evaluation effort at the Department of Labor, coordinating evaluation decisions and judgments across a variety of components within the Department of Labor. And Dr. Yancey has previously also served in similar roles with the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs. She holds a PhD from American University here in Washington, D.C., and I look forward to their comments and thoughts that they will share with you with respect to the Evidence Act, the recent legislation from Congress signed by the President that calls for a stronger and more continuous use of data and evidence in government decision-making and management. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Diana Epstein. Thank you so much for joining us, Diana and Christina. We look forward to hearing from you.
Great, all right, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. So I have a lot of material to present. I'm going to go very quickly because I want to leave plenty of time for Christina and then for discussion. But my hope is to give you all an overview of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, which is a recent piece of legislation that we think presents a great opportunity for government to really improve the way that it uses data and evidence for decision making. Okay, so what is the Evidence Act? So this all started with the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking, which was a bipartisan commission set up by then Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator Patty Murray. It had a wide variety of expertise, everything from program evaluation and statistics to data governance and privacy experts. They met for about 18 months and then produced a really comprehensive report with 22 recommendations to encourage systematic planning for evidence building, high quality data governance, and coordinated support for privacy protected data sharing. It's a really, like I said, an excellent report. It is quite long, has a lot of really detailed appendices, but there is an executive summary that's short and quite readable, so I'd encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. Okay, so they released this report, and then it resulted in some legislation. So again, then Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator Murray, shortly after the release of the report, introduced a bill that would address about half of the Commission's recommendations. These were thought to be sort of, I don't want to say the low-hanging fruit, but some of the recommendations that were more implementable and that would serve as foundational elements. So this passed through the House very quickly and then sort of sat in the Senate for quite a while, as often happens. But at the end of calendar year 2018, the bill passed and then was signed into law at the beginning of January of last year. So the bill includes 3 titles, and I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. So Title I addresses federal evidence building activities. Title II is all about open data and actually incorporates a separate piece of legislation that was moving in parallel at the time but was then incorporated into this bill. And then Title III is all about protecting confidential information, so that's what we call CIPC. Okay, so why is this such a big deal? Why should we care about the Evidence Act? So there's really 3 key ideas here. The first is that evidence-based policymaking needs systematic planning. And I'll talk about why this is different than perhaps how we've been doing things in the federal space. Second, we need good data governance in order to use federal data assets effectively. And then finally, we need coordinated support in order to share data effectively while also protecting privacy and confidentiality. Okay, so first, this idea that evidence-based policymaking requires systematic planning. So the idea here is that we need to start with the questions. So we need to identify the key questions where the answers would really help federal agencies execute their missions and deliver services more effectively. Then we need to determine the right approach to answering those questions. At the same time, we need to determine what capacity we currently have to answer these questions and then figure out how we might fill capacity gaps where they exist. So again, this is different than how we have often been doing evidence building, which is more of an ad hoc approach, not a systematic. Okay, second, this idea that we need really high quality data governance in order to use federal data well, to really leverage federal data as a strategic asset. And Christina, I think, is going to touch on this point, so I won't spend too much time on it. But essentially, as we all know, the federal government has a huge amount of data, and we want to figure out how to better use this. We want to make federal data available both to other federal agencies and to external data users whenever we can. But we can't just put it out there, right? We have to curate the data. We have to document what we have using inventories, code books, and then usable metadata as well. We want to make data open and available to the public, but we also need to develop some additional tools and technologies to do that effectively. Okay, third, and importantly, we need to better share data that is restricted use, so that has confidential information, but if joined together, if linked and leveraged, it could answer some really high value questions. But we have to do this while protecting privacy and confidentiality. So the default position for data sharing has tended to be no. The Evidence Act really tries to change this to a yes and less mentality. But again, to do this, we have to articulate high confidentiality standards, and we need to empower and identify trusted intermediaries to facilitate that data sharing. Okay, so moving on here. Again, so to bring this back to a higher level, why do we care about this? So what is the Evidence Act changing? It's important to note, I think, this builds on long-standing principles underlying federal policies and data infrastructure, so we're not starting from scratch here. We have a lot already to work with, but the law does create a new paradigm for federal agencies to think about how they build evidence and how they use data. So it does this in a number of ways. It first of all focuses on leadership. So it creates 3 new senior positions, 3 new senior officials at federal agencies who are responsible for implementing the Evidence Act. And it emphasizes collaboration and coordination among those senior officials, as well as others in the agency who are responsible for data use, data governance, data protection, and evidence building. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it puts in place a more strategic approach to evidence building. So there are places in the federal government that are building evidence well, but there are lots of places where this is not happening well. There are lots of places where evidence is being built in response to a particular mandate, a particular law, but for the most part, agencies are not taking a holistic, strategic approach, starting with those questions and then working down to figure out how to best answer those priority questions. So this really shifts that narrative to a more strategic approach. And then finally, it elevates program evaluation as a key agency function. And this is really important because there are some kinds of questions, like is a program or policy working as intended? Is it causing the intended changes? Those can only be answered by evaluations. And so we've had a statutory system for performance. We have a statutory system for statistics. We did not have a statutory system for evaluation until this law. So this is actually really important to fill that gap so that agencies, again, are systematically across the board asking and then answering evaluative questions. So the Evidence Act isn't happening in a vacuum. It complements other federal efforts that are underway. I won't go into these too much, but just to note, there is a federal data strategy, which is part of the President's management agenda. Again, that complements very well the Evidence Act, and the action plan for the federal data strategy does sort of attempt to operationalize a lot of the Evidence Act's requirements. Again, on the open data front, there's already policy on open data. This law sort of strengthens and codifies open data policy, as well as builds on other legislation like the Data Act and the Geospatial Data Act. And again, at OMB, where I work, we're really working hard to make sure that these efforts are complementary and aligned. The last thing we want to do is have federal agencies confused or feel like there are too many disparate requirements being piled on them. This is easier said than done. Policy tends to sort of layer on top of each other, but we're trying really hard to make sure these things fit together and make sense so that they can actually be implemented. Okay, so to that point, so this is the approach we took at OMB. So when a law like this passes, this is not atypical for there to be many provisions in the law that say, OMB must issue guidance, and the guidance is meant to then provide detail to agencies about how to actually implement the law. So this law is no different. There are many, many things where OMB is supposed to issue guidance. There are two ways we could have done this. So one is we just put out guidance one at a time, lots and lots of different guidance, and then say agencies, try your best to make sense of this. We decided a different approach was needed, and so we decided instead to put the guidance into just 4 pieces. So 4 pieces of guidance that would be more comprehensive, more integrated across functions. So it required us at OMB to work across offices in new ways for us So to have folks, for example, from my team, the evidence team, working together with folks from OIRA, working together with folks from OFCIO's office, working together with folks on the budget side, on the performance side, to really try to figure out how can we write guidance for agencies that takes into account all these different perspectives so that on the receiving end, the agencies can actually do something with it that will help them. So the first phase of guidance, I'll talk about in a minute, was issued in July, and that's a foundational piece that deals with learning agendas and those key personnel and some of the plans that are required. There'll be guidance forthcoming on open data related to Title II, additional guidance on and regs on SIPC, the Title III part, and then additional guidance on program evaluation standards and practices, which actually should be available, I'm hoping today, so late breaking news, that should be available within a couple hours, I think, so that's good news there. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're really trying for a coordinated and collaborative approach. We hope that this makes it easier for agencies to do what they have to do. We're trying to also be as flexible as possible. So again, there are two different ways to do this kind of thing. One is very prescriptive and say you must do X, Y, Z exactly in this way. Another approach, the one we decided to take, was to be more flexible, to sort of put in place a framework while offering agencies the ability to tailor requirements to meet their specific needs. And we felt like by doing that, agencies could own it and implement the law in a way that was meaningful for them. We do not want this to be a compliance exercise, and I can't really stress that enough. A law like this always has the potential to just be seen as a long list of new requirements. Agencies just check the box, I did it, move on. That's not what we want. We want this to be embraced. We think it has the potential to really improve decision making, to improve the ways that we build and use evidence, but agencies have to own it. They have to feel like they're doing it in a meaningful way that makes sense for their particular context, for their particular mission area. Okay, so I'll just quickly talk about a couple of the key pieces of Title I, which is that foundational piece about federal evidence building efforts. So first, learning agendas. So learning agendas are at the heart of this new approach to evidence building. The law calls them evidence building plans, but we've been calling them learning agendas for a number of years, and this is the term that's been more socialized in the community for a while. So what is a learning agenda? It's a systematic plan for identifying and addressing priority questions relevant to the program's policies and regulations of the agency. So again, it's going back to what are those key questions? If we can lay out the key questions that we have, if we answer them, it would really allow us to do our job better. Those are mission questions and operational questions. They should be things that it may take you years to answer, as well as questions where it might take a month or 6 months to answer, but in doing so would really improve the way that you function. Again, so this is supposed to be an iterative exercise where you lay out the questions, you start to answer them, and then you take the learnings and feed that back into the next set of questions that you ask. The interesting thing here is that learning agendas are now part of agency strategic plans. So there's a real explicit link to the agency's strategy and the strategic objectives and goals. Again, I think there's a couple of other elements of this that are very interesting. One is a requirement for stakeholder engagement. So the law actually requires that agencies engage a range of stakeholders in the learning agenda process. So that has the potential to really bring in a variety of different perspectives and views. And then finally, I want to make the point about transparency. So because learning agendas are part of strategic plans are public documents. So these will eventually be publicly posted. And that's a really important signal for agencies to say, these are the questions we think are important. These are the questions we plan to focus on. And it offers the opportunity for partnerships too, because an agency is signaling these are the questions that we need help answering potentially. Partners on the outside, if you want your research to be more policy relevant, please, align your research portfolio with these questions so that there's sort of a mutual benefit going on. So that's the hope. Quickly on the personnel, so like I mentioned earlier, the law creates 3 new positions. All agencies now have to have chief data officers, and then the CFO Act agencies, so the 24 largest, have to have evaluation officers and statistical officials. So these are the key folks responsible for implementing the Evidence Act. There are corresponding councils for each of these groups. So, for example, the Evaluation Officer Council meets monthly. And these councils provide a great opportunity for sharing lessons learned, for peer networking, and hopefully, again, leveraging the expertise and the experiences that do exist across the government. The OMB in its guidance required that agencies set up a data governance body, which again, we think is really important to have a central decision-making body that's responsible for setting and enforcing priorities for managing data so that that data can be used as a strategic asset and used effectively. We're really excited about these senior officials. We're spending a lot of time giving them support and technical assistance. We held a multi-day orientation last fall for all of the senior officials, and we continue to provide support and resources both online and in person to support them in their roles. Okay, I'll just touch real quickly on planning. So a couple of other new things that are part of this law. One, again, to the importance of evaluation is annual evaluation plans. So agencies are now going to have to lay out every year what are the significant evaluations that they intend to undertake in the coming fiscal year. Capacity assessments is another one. Again, I mentioned this at the very beginning, the importance of an agency looking inward and saying, what is the capacity we have across the research analysis, evaluation, statistics functions? What's the capacity we have to answer these kinds of questions, to do this work? Where are we seeing gaps? And then to take the next step, hopefully, and try to figure out how to leverage what they have and also what are some other ways they might fill those gaps. I'll skip this one since I think this is probably less important for this particular audience, but for those of you in the government, just know additional guidance from OMB is forthcoming. And like I said, that evaluation standards and practice should be available at some point, hopefully today. Okay, so I'll end with some opportunities here. So I'm really excited about the Evidence Act, and I think you all should be excited too, no matter where you sit, if that's in government, state, local, or federal, if you're in the private sector, if you are in academia or a research partner. I think all of us can get involved in this. If you're interested in accessing data, whether that's open data or restricted use data, this law will present new and increased opportunities to use federal data for evidence building efforts. Again, elevating evaluation, I think, is going to create a demand for more evaluative activities, which again creates hopefully an opportunity for some partnerships to carry out these activities. I mentioned transparency earlier. I'll say it again. I think this does offer a new kind of transparency for agencies. Posting learning agendas, posting evaluation plans, those are really important. It signals to the outside world, these are the things we care about. It offers the opportunity, again, for research portfolios to become more aligned with policy priorities. And then the last points here, this is about culture change in many ways. So we think that the law presents an opportunity to further strengthen and continue to build an evidence culture across the government. If we do this right, we think that the Evidence Act can be a turning point in terms of building this stronger evidence culture across government. I think everyone here listening in today is a key partner, and again, this has to be embraced, and it is going to be incremental progress, of course, but I think that this is to really shift evidence building. All right, so I will stop there, and I'm going to pass it off to Christina, who's going to talk about implementation at the Department of Labor.
Work also with our 4 business offices. So